Hi, welcome to our Gemara Shiur. We are learning Maseches Shabbos, and here we are, Daf Kuf Nun Hey Amud Aleph, towards the bottom of the page. Kuf Nun Hey Amud Aleph. We are ready to go. We are learning about feeding animals on Shabbos. The Shir is Le'ilun Nishmas, my father, Menachem ben Akiva, Tzchon L'Rocha, and for the quick release of the hostages, end of the war, and coming of Mashiach. So, speaking of my father, as a youngster, once worked like in a moshav, a farm, kibbutz, something like that. And he told me that feeding the animals is no fun. People think that feeding animals is a fun activity. That's true when you visit the zoo with your children. So your kids love, throwing food at the animals. And as long as the zookeeper doesn't catch them, that's fun. But in reality, when you work in a farm, feeding animals is a tircha. So on one hand, we don't want people to be toreach on Shabbos and work hard. Tircha is usher in Shabbos, even if it does not involve one of the 39 melachos. On the other hand, you can't let your animal starve on Shabbos either. So although feeding animals is a sort of tircha sometimes, nevertheless, we may or may not allow it in order to feed the animal. So we saw Machloikis Rav Huna and Rabbi Yehuda. This is where, and Rav Yehuda, regarding what you may or may not allow to do for the animals. The tricky part of the sugya is behind us. We summarized it a few times yesterday. So let's just summarize and say as follows. According to Rav Huna, you are not allowed to create from non-food something that is not considered animal food, and you untie it, preparing it for the animals, making it into animal food. That's also because you're creating something on Shabbos. Mashe'en ken, when you have ready animal food and you want to work extra hard to make it extra nice and appetizing for them, you want to spoil them, but this is tircha for you. Tircha is not allowed. That's what Rav Huna says. That's what we saw before. However, I'm sorry. Rav Huna says that you are allowed to be torech. Excuse me. Rav Huna says that to create the food, you're not allowed to create. To be torech and spoil the animal, to make the edible food even more appetizing, more edible for the animal, that, according to Rav Huna, is allowed. That is allowed. We are torech. Yeah. Sorry. Rav Yehuda said the opposite. Rav Yehuda said that you may create from non-food. I don't mean create in a way that involves any of the melachas. But let's say the issue was taking something that's meant for firewood and using it not for firewood, you would use it for animal food. So converting it into animal food, making it shivuye, giving it the name of animal food, according to Rav Yehuda, this is something that is allowed. How come you're allowed to create something on Shabbos? Tzar Ba'alei Chaim. The animal has to eat. But if you already have the animal food, you want to improve it. For example, you want to take the sprouts or any animal fodder, the straw, and make it nicer by spreading it and adding and make it nice for them. Yeah, that is not allowed. Why? That's extra tircha, extra exertion for no good reason. Let the animal not be so spoiled. Don't spoil your animal on Shabbos on the expense of your own tircha. This is what Rav Yehuda says. Now, we mentioned that at the end of the Mishnah that we read yesterday, I'm reading now the end of the Mishnah, and then I'll go back down, jump down to the end of the Gemara. Says the Mishnah in the Seifa, En merastin lo shachas v'lo charuvin lifnei behema, ben daka ben gasa, which means one is not allowed to be merasik, one is not allowed to cut, to chop, either shachas, which is nice, fresh animal food that's green, like the sprouts, yeah. Don't cut it for the animal. Neither should you cut charuvin, which are harder. They are carobs, the hard ones. Don't cut them for the animal, whether the behemoth is daka or gasa, whether the animal is the smaller one, like the sheep that doesn't have strong teeth, or the cow that has big teeth. Whatever the case may be, don't do that. Okay, that's what the Tanakama says. Rabbi Yehuda matir becharuvin ledaka. Rabbi Yehuda says no. If the animal food is hardish, Charuvin, the carobs are hard, even for human beings, and the animal is small, then you're allowed to. This is just quoting Tanakama versus Rabbi Yehuda. Don't confuse Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is a Tana, Rav Yehuda is an Amora. Now we're going to attack the opinion of Rav Huna, and everything will be clear. Don't worry. Toshma. We are in the middle of the wide lines. Let's quote the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'charuvin ledaka. What did Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda said that if the charuvin that are harder are served for the animal, you're allowed to chop it if your client is a behemoth daka. Why? Behemoth daka miskena. It can't eat so well hard stuff. So this is what sounds like what it is basic. Something basic such as poor animal, hard food, misken little animal. That's a basic need, and Rabbi Yehuda said that's okay. Now, what does that indicate? The Gemara now is medayek, inferring ledaka in legasa loy. But if the animal is a behemoth gasa, it can eat very well. But the behemoth gasa is spoiled. You want to do extra spoiling, and even though the behemoth gasa may eat the charuvim, you should cut it for them. No. That I agree. Don't cut. Yeah. Now the assumption is what Rabbi Yehuda said is not completely disagreeing with Tanakama. He's going in the same direction with Tanakama. He's just disagreeing on one detail about the animal type and the food type. But generally, he seems to agree with Tanakama. Otherwise, he would have said, all is okay. It doesn't. Therefore, now the Gemara is proving the following. From the words of Rabbi Yehuda, the way he relates to Tanakama, we can guess what Tanakama meant, meaning, if you want to tell me that Tanakama thinks, if Tanakama also believes that you're not supposed to do the extra tircha, the extra spoiling, and work hard just to spoil the animal, that you're not supposed to do, but shvuye mashvinan, but to create the basic food, the basic need, to change from non-food into yes food, then it makes sense. Hainu de Koma Rabbi Yehuda, now makes sense. Rabbi Yehuda on the same wavelength is adding a detail, and he says the charuvin ladaka. Wait, says him to Tanakama, you forbade everything for everybody? No, let's follow your logic, Tanakama, and look what comes out. Charuvin, that's hard charuvin. Ledaka, for a small little kid, sheep, it's also considered as making basic food. And therefore, I agree with you that creating basic food is okay. And therefore, on top of that, I think that the charuvin for daka is also considered as making it from non-edible to yes edible. Yeah, but they're on the same wavelength. This is a clear attack on Rav Huna. If we explain the Mishnah like Rav Huna, look what comes out. Something very funny. If you want to tell me you Rav Huna, Tanakama Sovel, that's just the opposite from Rav Yehuda. What did Rav Huna say? To make something into food, to give it the name, the definition of food, we don't do. To give it the name of food, we're not supposed to, because you can't create things on Shabbos. And on the other hand, mitrach beuchla metrachinan, but to be toreach, to actually make the extra mile, the extra frill, the extra pampering is allowed, then Rabbi Yehuda doesn't begin to make sense the way he relates to Tanakama. Why? Rabbi Yehuda is supposed to be on the same wavelength with Tanakama, the same idea, to just change one detail, charuvin ladaka. But then, if the ongoing story here is in the background that you are allowed to be toreach, then Rabbi Yehuda demati b'charuvin ledaka. If Rabbi Yehuda believes that charuvin for a daka and the charuvin must be not so hard, and cutting them for the daka is extra spoiling, kol sheken legasa, then clearly a gasa can for sure eat it very nicely. For the gasa, chopping it for her is for sure spoiling. Give an example. Some people like to, cut the food for their 2 years old. Fine. You cut the food and then he eats piece by piece and the parents cut it for him. But for your 5 years old, that's crazy. That's extra spoiling. I'm not giving shiur chinuch now, yeah. But then kol shekin lagasa. In other words, does make sense, right? Clearly, Rabbi Yehuda is on the wavelength of talking about the heter is to create food. So Tanakama are also talking about creating food, and that seems to be more like Rav Yehuda, and it's against Rav Huna. Answers the Gemara, no. Misavar daka mamish. Do you think the daka means an animal that's a small, frail, little animal that's so delicate and can't eat? No. My daka gasa. Really, the bema daka means a big, sturdy cow. Or my karila daka. Why do we call it a small animal, a thin? Daka is like a thin kind of animal. The daika be'oichlo. Because the animal is spoiled, which means basically, enochinami. Tanakama believes that spoiling the animal is okay, and therefore says Rav Yehuda, aha, if you have an animal, it could be a big bull, but he's spoiled with his food. He likes to have his food very, very thinly cut. So for him, I'm allowed to cut it to his taste. Es mein Kind, es. And that's okay. Maybe that's what Rabbi Yehuda is coming to say. Okay, and that's my answer. And really, the whole discussion, both Rabbi Yehuda and Tanakama, they allow you to spoil your animal. Just like Rav Huna said, spoiling the animal is okay, even though you're working hard. So the Gemara, no. The Gemara rejects that answer and says, no, it doesn't make sense. Why? Habidiktani Reisha, bein Daka, bein Gasa. In the Reisha, Tanakama says Daka and Gasa. It doesn't mean spoiled animals versus none. Clearly, Tanakama meant Daka and Gasa kipshutoi, a small animal and a big fat one, the small calf or the sheep and the big bull, yeah, the ox, yeah. Michlad Rabbi Yehuda, Daka mamish. If Rabbi Yehuda is talking in the same term as Tanakama, so don't give me that answer. The Daka means an animal that's medayak and spoiled with the food, with the eating, finicky. It means big animal and small animal. And therefore, kasha, kauma, kasha, it's difficult. Meaning, we just basically asked a strong question on Rav Huna. To summarize the whole story, Rav Huna was saying that you are allowed to spoil your animal. From the Lashon of the Mishnah, it sounds not like that. Because the Pashup Pshat of Rabbi Yehuda, which generally follows Tanakama, is that charuvin ledaka. You're allowed to do is for the hard pieces, you should be able to cut for the small animal. That's not spoiling. That's doing the minimum, making it bichlal edible for him. And that is okay. V'shenken spoiling for the big animal, that's called spoiling. That's not okay to be toreach for the big animal. And therefore, the Mishnah Pshat does not work right, doesn't work so well, according to Rav Huna. And really, halacha, because of this question I saw in halacha and the Rishonim, that's why we're going to see at the end that halacha is like Rav Yehuda. It says what? You're allowed to create food for an animal on Shabbos, not in a way that's also the oraisa. You're allowed to convert something from non-edible to yes edible, because otherwise the animal is not going to eat. Bichlal. It's not being spoiled. Tzar b'alechaim. Shenken, to pamper and do the extra, fancy thing for the animal to make it more appetizing, so the animal will eat it quicker and better. That much. You're not supposed to do. That's tircha. Toshma. Now let's listen to what it says in one of the next few Mishnahs. We're going to see. Now we're going to quote a Mishnah that we're Be'ezras Hashem see in a few days. It says in the Mishnah, the truth is that Mishnah issue is muktzeh. We're on purpose ignoring muktzeh now. We're siphoning a different nekuda from the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, one is allowed to cut dluin, big pieces of pumpkin. Pumpkin is meant, usually pumpkin when it is raw, it's hard. It's a pumpkin, a big gherkin, a pumpkin. It's usually hard, fresh and hard. And you have dluin, you have pumpkins. In the middle of Shabbos, you have dluim, and you have hungry animals that are vegetarian, cows, sheep. Lifna behema, you're allowed to cut them in front of the behema, and we don't consider it as muktzah, even though it's normally meant to be eaten by human beings. We don't care, because you can change it from human being food to the animal food. Okay, fine. It's not called muktzah, because we follow Rabbi Shimon, whatever. Another thing you're allowed to do, let's say an animal died, and even if the animal died on Shabbos, even a treif animal, any animal died on Shabbos, you have dogs You want to feed, you're allowed to cut the nevela and give it to the dogs to eat. Now, you can understand it in either one of two ways. Either the dluim and the nevela are unedible, are inedible, yeah, and they can't eat it, and you cut it in order to give them the minimum. Or maybe it is edible, and you're just making it easier and better for the animal to eat. You're a nice balabos for your animal, a nice daddy, nice owner, and you're terech on Shabbos to do it. Oh, so now says the Gemara, let's try and see what's going on there. My love, what's the story? Dluin Dumid and Avela. Let's assume, for starters, that the case Dluim and Nevela, the pumpkins and the dead corpse, the dead body of whichever animal, of the horse, whatever, both of them are what? Both of them are similar. They're mentioned together in the Mishnah for a reason. Now, my love, Dluim Dumid and Nevela. Maybe the story is that the Dluim are like the Nevela, meaning, Ma Nevela de Rekicha, Av Dluim de Rekichi. Just like Nevela, naturally, meat is a soft thing. For us, raw meat is not soft, but for the dogs, it is. So just like Nevela, for the dogs to bite into dead meat is very easy. Yeah, dead sheep, dead goat, then it's soft. Avdluin de Rekichi. So even though sometimes pumpkin is hard, probably we're talking here in this case, Dluim is mentioned together with Nevela to say the Dluim also are soft. You know, pumpkin that's been out of the fridge for a good few days, it's pretty soft. Oh, so the food is soft, and you're still allowed to cut it. Alma, that is to say, Tarchinen be'oichlo. Oh, you see that on Shabbos, leave muktzah alone. That in fact, you're allowed to cut it on Shabbos means you're allowed to be toreach in food. Tiyufta de Rav Yehuda. That's against Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said you're not supposed to do extra tircha to spoil the animal. And in that Mishnah, sounds like it is allowed. Uh-oh, says Rav Yehuda, no, not at all. I would reverse the common denominator between Nevela and Dluim. I'll work it just the other way around. Nevela dume de Dluim. Nevela is similar to Dluim, meaning Madluim, the Ashuni, naturally, the way it should be eaten fresh, the Dluim, the pumpkins are Ashuni. Ashuni is hard, koshim, it's hard. Af nevela da ashuna, nevela also is hard. We're talking about a hard nevela, aha, which means both pumpkin and nevela are hard, and the animal is unable to eat it, and you're making it edible for the animal, which is allowed. Why am I allowed to make something from no to yes? Making it because it's tzar ba'alechaim, and that's exactly what Rav Yehuda was saying all along. But the Gemara has a question. When do you have a nevela that's so hard? Normally, meat, naturally, even pretty soon after the animal dies, whichever animal died, I don't know, sheep, goat, something, for the dog's strong teeth, it's soft, it's easy to eat. So why are you telling me that the nevela is hard? Which nevela could be hard? Answers the Gemara, yes, bibsar pili. Could be the flesh of the elephants. He had a dead elephant. Yes, sometimes people would breed elephants. The elephant is dead. Elephants, as we know, is the biggest mammal. Very, very thick skin, thick and hard skin and flesh. And therefore, it could be some kind of animal that has very, very strong, hard flesh. And that's a story. And the dogs can't eat it unless you cut it for them. If you think this teretz is a bit doichak, the Gemara has another answer, inami. Alternatively, another answer, beguriosa zutri. Or we're talking in a guriosa zutri, we're talking about a gur. You know, it's a gur, a cub. We're talking about a puppy. The klovim are not the big, strong one with the big teeth. We're talking about, you know, a small, tiny, little, I don't know, bulldog or, I don't know, Amstaff, you know, Zakot and Godel here. But right now it's very small and the teeth are not so developed yet. So for that animal, any nevela is hard to eat. And therefore, you're allowed to cut it for the animal, for the dog, for the puppy, for the tiny little dog, because it can't eat big pieces. You have to cut it for him in small pieces. And that's not called spoiling. That's called basics. So the basic preparation from no food to yes food, that's what the Mishnah allowed over there, according to Rav Yehuda. And that is the more accepted opinion, la halacha too. I'm going to quote you the halacha. Lemaisa, I can tell you the halacha now. I saw it in Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Berurah. It's pretty simple. Kuf nun hey amud bais. Kuf nun amud bais. We are a few lines before the Mishnah. So halacha lemaisa, we say you are not allowed to spoil your animal with extra tircha for the food. If the animal can eat it and you start being, like a little kid, so that you're not supposed to spoil the animal. If it can eat, it can eat. But to make something inedible to yes edible, that's okay. Why? Because tar b'alechaim. Otherwise, the animal really can't eat it. So even though we're creating something new, that's allowed. Toshma, another one and last item on the list. The Tani Rav Chanan min Ardo. Rav Chanan min Ardo is telling us the following brisa, quoting a brisa. Mefarchinan teven ve'aspasta. One is allowed to chop two types of animal food. Teven is straw. Aspasta are, as we said, like sprouts. You are allowed to cut both of them, ume'arvin, and mix them together. Nice salad. And you give it to the animal, a nice mixture of the straw and the aspasta. Let me tell you a little secret from Rashi. Rashi says, why do you have to mix them? Because that's the way to make the animal eat the teven. Naturally, animals don't like teven as much as they like aspasta. Aspasta, that's nice. That's a fun thing to eat. The sweets, the steaks. And the teven is the lettuce or the broccoli, the things the kids don't like eating so much, yeah? So you mix the two together, so it's going to eat the healthy together with the less healthy, like we do for children, yeah? So teven pasta, you're allowed to mix them together. Alma, what does that show us? Tarchinan ba'oichlo. Sounds like you're allowed to be torech. Again, this is another attempt to support Rav Huna. You see that you're allowed to be torech with food. Because with all the respect, it's picky, I don't eat this, I don't want to eat that. Sounds like my 10 years old, yeah? So tarchinan ba'oichlo. In other words, yeah, you're starting chopping and mixing. Pshia, you're a five-star chef in a hotel. You're making all salad for the animal that's being spoiled, right? To encourage it to eat. That sounds like tircha. It doesn't sound like basic feeding. So the choyer we see Rav Huna is right. You're allowed to be torech for the animal food. And says the Gemara, no. And says the Gemara rejects what we said. Teven betiv nasarya. Teven, we're talking about teven that smells bad. It's not even edible unless it's mixed together. Rashi says it doesn't mean completely, some mean stinks. Doesn't mean that it stinks inedible completely, otherwise it would be muktzeh. But this teven is really, if you eat it by itself, no animal, even the non-spoiled ones, they will not eat teven Syria by itself. Teven that's masriach, nobody would eat by itself. You have to mix it with something else to make it edible. So it's not spoiling, it's basics. So making it from non-food into yes food, and that's allowed. Aspasta bi'ilizutri. What about cutting the aspasta? Why do you have to cut the aspasta? Aspasta is nice and fresh. Yes, we're talking about young animals. As we said before, elizutri is like ayir zutri. Meaning the small animals, the cubs, the baby donkey, the baby cow, the baby sheep, they can't eat even aspasta unless it's cut. And that's why you're allowed to cut it, because for them, it's considered inedible unless you take care of it. Okay? That exactly is what Rav Yehuda was allowed. Bidiyuk. That's exactly the kula. Says Rav Yehuda, and this is exactly the whole sugya, and this is maskono. The chiddush is that even though you're taking something lo ra'ui, making it to yes ra'ui, something not suitable for eating, making it yes suitable, that's exactly the heter because of tar b'alechaim. Because this is Nisa the Rabbanon, it's not the Oraisa, right? It's the Rabbanon. It's like Tvilas Kalim, right? You're making it kosher, right? Or Psak Din, right? You're kosherizing by saying it's kosher. But here too, you're making a creation, just the Rabbanon. Rabbanon allow that because of Tzar Ba'alechaim. That's what Rashi said before. Very good. And that's the Rav Yehuda's opinion. Ze alohe. Okay? Says the Heilige Mishnah. Says the next Mishnah more about feeding your animals. And this time we're talking about force feeding, feeding hard. So now our Mishnah has an issue with feeding animals in a way, I wouldn't say force feeding dafka, but feeding the animal in a way that the animal cannot spit it out. Let's see. It says the Mishnah. There are three ways of feeding a camel, apparently. I never tried any of them, but let's see. En oivesin es a gomel. One is not allowed to be oives es a gomel. What's evus? Evus is a trough. You're not allowed to feed, I'm talking according to Rashi. This Mishnah has Rashi's Pshat and Rambam. I'm going now with Rashi to keep it straight, one way. Oivsin gomel means you put your hand all the way through his neck, through his throat, and you put so much food over there in one go, you throw a lot of food over there, like you create a whole avus. You created a whole room there full of food, yeah, and that keeps him going for a long time, and you really create more room in the stomach. You mamish fill in you fill in the camel's stomach with a lot of food. That you cannot do on Shabbos. Why not? From Rashi later on is mashma that that is too much of a tircha. Rambam says differently. Rambam says, don't feed your animal the normal way. You always feed it during the week, because then he may come to do Isurei Torah. He may come to do Toichen or Lash. Rashi says, Poshet, it's Tircha. It's, I guess, very hard to do that kind of force feeding. Veloy Doirsin. Also, you're not allowed to be Dosin. Machlokes in the words Dosin. Rashi says Dosin means also to put lidros, to push in. You can't push in to the digestive system of the camel in a way that it cannot return, that it cannot spit it out. That's dosin. Dosin means it's beyond a certain point in the digestive system where it's mamish down the throat where it can't spit it out anymore. Yeah? Don't do that either. That's also too much of a tircha, too strong. Aval mal'itin. La'al-it, like by Esav, hal-iteni no. Mal'iti means to feed. You're feeding a lot, but the animal may spit it out. La'al-it is more or less normal feeding, yeah? That the animal may be able to not eat. That you are allowed to do. So the strong, forceful into the stomach you can't do. To just feed into the mouth, you're okay doing that. That's when it comes to camels. What about the cows, the calves? Ve'en ma'amirin es ha'agolim aval mal'itin. But the agolim, there are only two categories. Very easy. Ein ma'amirin. The Gemara will explain what that means. Let me just give you one pshat. Ein ma'amirin is like dorsin. Ma'amirin, don't feed the egel, don't feed the calf into the beyond the throat where it can't spit it out. Don't do that on Shabbos. Aval mal'itin, allowed to feed him normally, to feed him into the mouth, even a lot, but just into the mouth where the animal can take it out. That's not tircha. Rashi's pshat makes a lot of sense. Yeah, just feeding normal, that's okay. A third animal is the tarnagoylin, the rooster, the chicken. Mehalkitin the tarnagoylin. For the tarnagoylim, you're allowed to also feed them in a way called mehalkitin. I would assume mehalkitin means feeding, right, with giving them the option of spitting it out. Now, the second part of the Mishnah, v'noisin ma'im lemursan avelo goivlin. That's a whole different sugya in the middle of the Mishnah. That's about lash. You're allowed to take mursan. Mursan is basically part of the wheat. Its mursan is similar to subin. Mursan is one part of the grains, like that can get sticky together with the water. You're allowed to put water onto it. Avalot goivlin, you can't knead them, you can't do lisha, can't mix them because of lash. We're not talking about this today. That will be for hopefully tomorrow. Yeah, it's all sugi of lash. It's not in today's Gemara. Just remember, you can put water on the mulsan, on that like things that come from the wheat or the barley. You know, some kind of like brand, similar to brand subin, similar. Avalot goivlin, can't mix it because it's lash. Okay. Now, the ein noisnin mayim lifnei dvoirim v'lifnei yonim shabashoivach. You're not allowed to place water in front of the bees. Let's say you have beehives, you breed bees. Don't put water in front of the bees, lifnei yonim shabashoivach, or in front of the yonim, the doves, the pigeons that live in the chicken coop, in the dove cot. Don't do that. Why? The Gemara says they can go and get the water. They fly. Let them get the water somewhere else, and we'll explain what's the problem of giving them water. Avazin, the geese, Tanagoylim, the chicken, the roosters, and Yonel the sois are very fancy kind of yoinim like Herod's, Hordus, King Hordus, the yoinim that live in the house, they don't fly a lot. They stay at home. Those animals, those birds, they don't fly high, right? The geese, the chicken, those type of birds, they stay at home all the time. So you have to give them water. They're not going to get the water anywhere else. You give them water at home. That will also be explained today, Bezos Hashem. Now let's start with the first series. Remember the camel? The camel is three levels. Oivsin, dosin, which are not okay, and there is mal'itin, it's softer kind of feeding, which is okay. First question, my ein oivsin. What does oivsin mean? Or what does ein oivsin mean? What does it mean not to do oivsin? Amar Yehuda, ein oivsin le'evus b'toch me'eho. As I told you, don't feed it so deep and so much to mamish create a whole space in the stomach full of food. That you don't do on Shabbos. Too much of a tircha. Frag the Gemara, Mika ki agavna? Is there such a thing in reality? To feed the animals so much? Yarchivu me'eh ke'evu, says Rashi. Are you serious? In reality, you're telling me that you can actually create more space in the stomach of the camel by feeding it so much? A very professional camel driver knows to do that. Says the Gemara, yes, there is such a reality. Ravir Medifti told us, Ledidi Chazili, I saw myself with my own two eyes, Ahu Taya, there was an Arab, Arabs and camels, a very big love story. So the Taya, the Arab, the Akhla Kura, he fed his camel a whole kor. Kor is a very big amount of food, that in a koilo, and it made the camel stronger. The camel then could schlep on his back, on his hump, he could schlep an extra core more than, besides the regular burden. He was so strong from all the food that he kept going for a very long time. Because camels, I guess like water, they don't eat much or don't drink much. They have to go in the desert for many, many days, as we say, right? The Sfinat HaMidbar, the ship of the desert, maybe works the same with food. So he fed him gave him a nice hefty amount of food, and he could really schlep a lot of food or a lot of a burden on his back. So reality is, yes, it's possible. Okay. Now, the other two types are, again, dosin versus mal'itin, or mamirin versus mal'itin. So let's leave ovsin alone. Ovsin is crazy. It's so hard, so big, whole feeding project. Of course, it's not allowed. Now we have the other two, which are, but the egel, it's called ma'amirin, which is not okay, versus mal'itin, which is okay. What do you call lehamri, which is not okay, and what's hal'oto, which is okay? Amar Yehuda, hamro lemokum she'eno yechol lachzir. As I told you, hamro, you feed it not a lot necessarily. It's not about going crazy, but the way you push in your hand to a place she'eno yechol lachzir. The animal can't refuse it. Maybe it can throw up, I don't know, but it can't spit it out anymore. It's in the digestive system. Hal'oto lemokum sh'chol lachzir. Hal'oto is no. You feed it into the mouth, maybe strong, maybe hard, but you feed it into the mouth where the animal, if he wants to, can spit it out and refuse it. That's all. Very nice. So according to Rashi, it makes sense. This is tircha, and this is not tircha. Rav Chizda argues on Rav Yehuda and says, no, idi ve'idi, both hamro and al-ota, l'mokum she'en echol lachzir, both of them are feeding into a point of no return, deep inside, and both of them mean that. So what's the difference? V'hamro bekli hal'oto bayad. Hamro, which is not allowed, is you take a big spoon, a tarvad, you take some kind of feeding spoon, utensil, and you push it in. Hal'oto is with your hand, and that's why it's okay. So Chizda is more lenient, right? More lakula. You can put it into a place of no return. However, what you're not allowed to do is to put it in the place of no return with the spoon, with a big spoon. But with your hand, you are allowed to. Okay? Meisiv Rav Yosef. Now, Rav Yosef is questioning Rav Chizda. And he says as follows. Remember what we said in the Mishnah about Tarnegolim? Tarnegolim was the third animal mentioned in the Mishnah. And we said you are allowed to do mehalketin le Tarnegolim. What's mehalketin? Interesting word. Whatever that means, it's allowed. Says the Braisa, to add to our Mishnah, mehalketin oton goylin, ve'en tzarich lomer shemalkitin. Remember the word, yeah? Mehalketin is allowed. Needless to say, malkitin. Lehalkit is easier, softer, lighter than mehalketin. But on the goylin, we can even do mehalket, kol sheken malkitin. Now, however, when it comes to yoinim, to a yona, to a dove, the ein malkitin le'yona shavach ve'loyne aliyah. Yona shavach yona aliyah are those who live in your house, and you're not supposed to be malkitin. Don't be malkit, which is the easier kind of feeding. Ve'entzarich lema she'en malkitin. Even if the easier thing, malkitin, you can't do to yoinim, kol sheken mehalkitin, which is hard, of course you cannot do. The $1,000,000 question is, all we understood here is like a math formula, X and Y, right? We can see clearly from the two contrasts, mehalketin is the strong thing, is the big stuff, strong and big and hard, and malkitin is like Hello Kitty, malkitin is like easy and soft and cute, yeah? Excuse me for the example. Yeah, I have crazy ways to remember things, yeah? I'm a father of 7 girls, you should remember that, yeah? So that's what comes to mind. Shen mehalketin. This is all very nice, but what does it mean? My mehalkitin or my malkitin? What's mehalkitin, which is strong, and what's malkitin, which is soft? Ilema, if you want to tell me that mehalkitin the safile beyadain. Mehalkitin means that you put it in, you take and you feed them with your hands without pushing in, just feeding, right? Have you been to the pinat chai, to the petting, to the kiddie corner? You put it in their mouth, okay. And malkitin, which is even easier, even softer, is the shadile kamayu. You just throw it in front of them. How do you feed birds, right? You just throw it in front of them. So for the animal, which is called tarnegoilin, for the chicken and the roosters, you're allowed to do not only malkitin, even mehalkitin, to put it in the mouth is okay. Wait, doesn't make sense. Because then the second part of the brisa sounds crazy. Michlal, that is to say, the yoyne shavech ve'yoyne aliyah, mish de kamayu namiloi. If you translate malkitin as just throwing it on the floor, on the ground in front of them, and they peck it, why is that not allowed? That's crazy. That's not tircha, to just throw it in front of them and go to shul and go to the chavrusa, go to my wife. What's the problem? Yeah, you're not allowed to do that. How far do you go? That's not tircha. And anyway, how do you expect them to eat? Yeah, it can't be that, right? Elalav must be your definition of malkitin and mehalkitin is wrong. Must be a different definition, a different translation for those terms. Elalav must be bigger and stronger. Mehalkitin lemokum she'ein echol lachzir. Oh, mehalkitin means you are allowed to push into the throat of the tarnegolim deep into a place of no return. And malkitin lemokom she'echol lachzir. Malkitin means feeding into the mouth, and feeding into the mouth to a place where the animal may spit it if it wants. So now let's summarize. The brisa works very well. The tarnegolim you're allowed to feed into the mouth and even to the throat. The yoinim, no. The yoinim, for whichever reason, but at least makes sense, the yoinim you can't feed at all. You throw it on the ground in front of them. That is allowed. Makes sense. That's not tircha. And the yonim, they like you feed, right? In Europe, right? That's what they do in the big squares. In Europe, in Italy, in England, right? They feed right? They throw the crumbs in front of the pigeons and they all come and they eat it. They do it in Israel too. So therefore, good. That makes sense. Not all. But what comes out? Something very funny comes out. Wait. Now let's try and attach it to the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? That you are allowed to do mehalketin, right? To the tarnegolim. Even though mehalketin means into the throat, deep inside. Ooh, michlal, must be, comes out. The hamro bekli. How could you tell me you're allowed to put inside the throat of the birds? Because must be just what? It's excuse me, I made a mistake before. I said the question is on no, but you have to the Rav Yehuda. Oh, it's a question on Rav Yehuda. Why? Because you see that just like Rav Chizda said, Rav Chizda said that you are allowed to push into the throat inside, deep inside, as long as you're using your hand. And that's why mehalketin is okay for the Tornagolim. Because it is okay to push inside as long as you're using your hand. If you're using a spoon, look, I have a spoon over here. If you're using a spoon, that's what's not allowed. Makes a lot of sense. Mehalketin is okay as long as you use your hand. And that's what Rav Chizda said all along. Masha'enken, when it comes to the kli, that's not allowed. Masha'enken, according to Rav Yehuda, it's not good. Why? Rav Yehuda said that you're never allowed to push into the throat, regardless of whether it's a hand or a kli or a spaceship. You can never put the thing inside the throat. Doesn't make sense, because me'alkatin must be into the throat. And you see, it is okay to do to the Tornagolim. Amar l'charav Yehuda, hold it. Amar l'charav Yehuda, have a good answer. L'oil malkitin means esafi lebeyadayim, and malkitin deshadi lekamayu. Rav Yehuda is taking us one step backwards in the sugya. Rav Yehuda says no. The original translation of mehalkitin and malkitin is what I like. Meaning, mehalkitin doesn't mean into the throat. Mehalkitin means into the mouth gently. The animal can spit it out. And that's why it's allowed to be done for the Tornagolim. And malkitin means to throw it in front of the animals. Just throw it on the floor and they pick it and they peck it. You told me that it's crazy. Why shouldn't I be allowed to feed my doves, my pigeons, by just throwing the grains in front of them in the ground? The answer is yes, you are not allowed to feed them even by throwing in front of them in the ground. Why? Opa, that's a thing. And that's a very, very famous yisoid in feeding animals on Shabbos. And that's Nogia nowadays to people who own dogs or don't own dogs or cats or street cats, and all these questions we have today. You are allowed to feed an animal mizonois and alecha. Meaning, if you own a dog, or you own a cat, or you own a whatever that can't eat otherwise, right? You have a dog, so he's not going to eat outside in the street. It's a home dog. And because mizonois and alecha, you're allowed to feed it on Shabbos. But in mizonois and alecha, if you have a bird that comes in and out of your house, you're in a shoivach, he lives in a dove cart, you live in a farm, this Yona, it happens to be maybe owned by you, but Lamaisa, it can fly all over the place. It does not depend on your feeding. You're not allowed to feed it on Shabbos. Why? Because even the smallest pe'ula is considered a tircha, even if it's not tircha. Even to just throw the food in front of it is also with the rabbanon, aims and also alecha. That's why if kids go to a kiddie corner on Shabbos, which could be allowed, providing it's inside the eruv, tchum, v'chule, and you don't touch the animal, you manage a kosher kiddie corner, pinat chai, on Shabbos. The kids are not allowed to feed those animals on Shabbos because animals are also alecha. They're not dependent on your children, dependent on the owner, and therefore that's not allowed. Kedetanya, as the Brisa says, noisin mezonis lifnei kelev, ve'noisin mezonis lifnei chazir. Oh, one is allowed to feed a dog on Shabbos, and actually should. What kind of dog? I'll surprise you. Either your own dog or a street dog that has nobody else to feed him. Because street dogs are naturally often very hungry. People don't feed them. You're not allowed to feed chazir, not even your own chazir. What's the difference? The dog, in case you own a dog, in case that it's allowed, it's not always allowed, yeah? It's a dog that's not scary, or you live next to the Arabs or something, or, I don't know, dangerous neighborhood, but let's say you have a dog that's allowed to be owned, then you're supposed to feed it, yes? It's it depends on you. But the chazir, you're not supposed to feed it, even if it's yours. Why? He's not supposed to own it. Rashi says, because it was a klala to do shloshes shavuos for 3 weeks. That's when they made the gzera, right? When the Churban of Yerushalayim, the siege, they said, Aru Yehudi Shigadol Chazirim. Whoever's going to breed Chazirim in Eretz Yisrael, you're not allowed to have Chazirim in Eretz Yisrael. If you own a Chazir in Eretz Yisrael, you're not supposed to have it. Yeah, what do you do with it? Give it to a goy. The goy should feed it. You're not supposed to own it. And therefore, don't feed it b'chlal, even if it's not a tircha. Amar Ravashi says, Mesnisi Namidaika. Our Mishnah also is meduyak like we said. The Mishnah says as follows. We want to prove our point from the Mishnah. It says at the end of the Mishnah, Ein noisin mayim lifnei dvoirim v'lifnei erenim shabashoivach. Don't put water to drink, drinking water, in front of the bees and in front of the yonim that are in the dovecot. But those birds that cannot walk far, those birds are more homebound. The geese, the chicken, the fancy kind of yonim, you're supposed to give them to drink on Shabbos. My time. What's the reason? Oh, because these are animals you're supposed to feed. These are animals you're not supposed to feed. That's a proof. Says the Gemara, no. You may be right about what you said, but that proof is not necessarily true. Why? According to you, according to you, why did you speak about water? If you want to tell me that this kind of animal, the dvoirim and the yonim, are just self-sufficient, they don't need me ever, so why did the Mishnah speak about water? Why did the Mishnah not say even a bigger chiddush, that even food I'm not supposed to give them, because it can manage on their own? Ella, shiny maya deshchichi be'agma. Could be it's only true regarding water, because water they can eat outside, drink outside. The bees, they fly far away. The, what's the names? The yonim, the more natural kind of yonim, not the royal ones. The regular street ones, they fly far away and they find water in the wilderness, Bagam, in the lake, very easily. But food, they may not find so easily. So food you are supposed to feed them. So now we're not saying it's wrong, the concept of Zanosam Lecha versus Em Zanosam Lecha. It's still true. But to prove it from water, that's necessarily true. Because water is something that even an animal that yes Zanosam Lecha, and for food, you can't find food outside there. There's no animal food anywhere in the wilderness, not necessarily. Mashenk and water can be always found anywhere, so water you don't give them. Mashenk and food you may want to give them. Chutz mizeh, there could be another rule of mezonosam lecha versus en mezonosam lecha. Adkan, oh, it's a very, very good place to stop. Be'ezras Hashem tomorrow, Dorosh Rabbi Yoino, a whole interesting agadata about a dog. Oh, it's time to finish. And see you, Be'ezras Hashem, next. When do you want to do it, my neighbor? Shkoich, Tzlach Avrocha. Thank you to everybody for any time. Yeah.